A wedding destined to unite two powerful families was about to take place, every detail meticulously planned, every guest holding their breath in anticipation. But in the blink of an eye, everything unraveled. The bride disappeared, and in the chaos, an ordinary woman was thrust into a role that was never meant to be hers. She walked down the aisle, exchanged vows, and sealed her fate with a man who had no idea she was a stranger. But what began as deception turned into something far more dangerous, an undeniable connection, a love that should never have existed. As secrets unravel and the real bride returns, one question remains. When the truth is finally exposed, who will he choose? A story of betrayal, passion, and unexpected love, where the line between right and wrong is blurred, and fate plays its own cruel game. Stay with us until the very end, because in this story, the truth may come too late. The Montenegro estate had never looked more lavish. Chandeliers bathed the golden hall in warm light, the air thick with the scent of fresh lilies. Guests in their finest attire murmured in hushed excitement, their eyes fixed on the altar, where Victor Montenegro stood, tall and composed. Victor had spent his life navigating a world he couldn't see. Blind since childhood, he relied on sharp instincts, and right now, something felt wrong. The wedding was set to begin, yet he sensed hesitation among the guests. His bride was late. Backstage, chaos erupted. "Where is Camila?" one of the bridesmaids hissed, her voice sharp with panic. "She's not here." The wedding coordinator's face was pale. She vanished. The air crackled with tension as assistants rushed to control the disaster. In the middle of the commotion stood Isabella Duarte, an assistant to the wedding dress designer. She had spent the last year stitching veils, arranging pearls, and watching wealthy brides glide into dresses she could never afford. Today, she was just supposed to make sure everything was perfect. Instead, fate had other plans. "You." One of the frantic organizers grabbed her wrist. "What?" Isabella frowned, her heart pounding. "You're the same size as Camila. Put this on." A silk veil was shoved into her hands. "No, I can't. There's no time. If the bride doesn't walk down the aisle, the Montenegros will be humiliated." Before she could protest, they pulled a veil over her face, shrouding her in a layer of deception. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she was ushered into the grand hall. Each step down the aisle felt like a step toward disaster. The murmurs of the guests rose. Something was off. They could feel it. But no one dared stop the ceremony. At the altar, Victor reached for her hand, his grip firm, steady, nothing like the storm inside her. The vows were spoken. The rings exchanged. A gentle brush of lips sealed a fate that was never meant to be hers. She was now Isabella Montenegro, a bride by mistake. The Montenegro mansion was a world of its own, a place where power and wealth dictated every rule. It wasn't just a house. It was a fortress of influence, filled with people who watched Isabella with scrutinizing eyes. Victor sat in his private study, fingers lightly tapping against the polished oak desk. His expression was unreadable. "You've been quiet," he finally said. Isabella's stomach twisted. He was too perceptive. "I'm just overwhelmed." It wasn't a lie, at least. Victor smirked, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I expected Camila to be distant, but you feel different." Her hands clenched in her lap. "We realize." Before she could respond, Lucia Montenegro entered the room. Victor's mother was a woman who exuded control. Everything about her, her pristine designer dress, her sharply manicured nails, was calculated. Her gaze swept over Isabella with an icy chill. "There will be an event tomorrow to celebrate your union," Lucia announced. "You will behave appropriately. We Montenegros have an image to uphold." Isabella nodded, throat tight. She didn't belong here, but she couldn't leave. Not until she knew what had happened to Camila. That night, as she lay in the massive bed beside a man who barely knew her, Isabella stared at the ceiling, trapped in a lie she never intended to live. The Montenegro mansion was colder than Isabella expected. The grandeur The polished marble floors, the gilded chandeliers, it all screamed power and perfection, yet the walls felt like a cage. After the guests had left, the silence inside the mansion was suffocating. Isabella stood in the vast master bedroom, her fingers trembling as she removed the heavy wedding gown. The weight of the fabric was nothing compared to the weight of her deception. Victor sat by the window, his back to her. The city lights flickered in the distance, a world he could no longer see. He exhaled slowly. "You're quiet," he finally said. Isabella swallowed. How much did he suspect? She hesitated. "It's a lot to take in." Victor's head tilted slightly. Marriage. A life built on a mistake. A man who thought she was someone else. A blind husband who had no idea that the woman he kissed at the altar wasn't the one he was meant to marry. She nodded stiffly. Victor smirked. "You sound surprised. Did you think it would be easy?" "No." But she also hadn't expected to be here in the first place. "Come," he said, patting the seat beside him. "Let's talk." Isabella hesitated but obeyed, sitting at a careful distance. "I never wanted this marriage," Victor admitted. "But my mother insisted, and I do what's necessary for my family." His words made her stomach twist. Would he feel the same if he knew the truth? "I understand," she murmured. He turned slightly in her direction. "Do you?" His blind eyes, deep and unreadable, searched for answers she couldn't give. Before she could respond, there was a knock at the door. Lucia Montenegro entered without waiting for permission. Her presence immediately filled the room with icy authority. "Tomorrow, the press will expect a statement from both of you," she announced. "You will smile, you will be charming, and you will not embarrass this family." Her gaze swept over Isabella with subtle disdain. "That won't be a problem, will it, dear?" Isabella straightened. "No, of course not." "Good." Lucia turned on her heel. "Victor, we'll discuss business in the morning." As soon as she left, Isabella let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Victor smirked. "Intimidating, isn't she?" That was an understatement. "Try surviving her as a daughter-in-law," he added dryly. A shiver ran down Isabella's spine. That was exactly what she had to do, for now. The morning sun filtered through the massive glass windows, bathing the Montenegro mansion in a golden glow. Yet, for Isabella, the brightness only highlighted her predicament. She was an outsider in a world of wealth and deception. A maid entered, her demeanor respectful but cautious. "Mrs. Montenegro, breakfast is served." Mrs. Montenegro. The title felt wrong on her skin. Descending the marble staircase, Isabella felt the weight of dozens of eyes on her. The household staff, the security guards, they were all watching, judging. At the long dining table, Victor sat with his usual composed elegance, sipping coffee. Lucia sat across from him, reading a newspaper. "Good morning," Isabella greeted. Lucia barely acknowledged her. "Your presence is expected at the Montenegro Charity Gala next week. You'll need a new wardrobe." The cold, dismissive way she spoke made it clear. Isabella was a temporary inconvenience. Victor chuckled. "No good morning for your new daughter-in-law." Lucia's lips curled in distaste. "When I believe she's worthy of it." A sharp silence followed. Isabella clenched her fists beneath the table. Lucia didn't know the truth, but she didn't need to. She had already decided Isabella wasn't good enough. Before Isabella could reply, Dante Morelli entered the room. Tall, polished, and effortlessly charismatic, Dante was Victor's best friend and lawyer. His sharp eyes flickered toward Isabella as he took a seat. "You're glowing, Camilla," he said, his tone teasing. "Married life must suit you." Isabella stiffened. Did he suspect something? Victor smirked. "Don't harass my wife, Dante." Dante raised an eyebrow, his gaze lingering on Isabella a second too long. Breakfast continued in tense silence. When Isabella left the table, Dante followed her into the hallway. "Camilla," he murmured, his voice too soft. "Or should I say, whoever you really are." Isabella's breath caught. He knew. The hallway was eerily quiet as Isabella froze under Dante's sharp gaze. He had whispered those words so casually, yet they held the weight of something dangerous. "Excuse me," she managed, forcing her voice to remain steady. Dante smirked, tilting his head slightly. "I said, whoever you really are." Her heart pounded violently in her chest. Did he know? Had he already uncovered her secret? She took a careful breath, trying to mask her panic. "That's a strange thing to say." Dante leaned in slightly, his voice low and smooth. "Not really. You seem different from the woman Victor described before the wedding. More hesitant, less polished." His eyes gleamed with curiosity. "Or maybe I'm imagining things." He was testing her, forcing a small smile. Isabella lifted her chin. "Or maybe you just didn't know Camilla as well as you thought you did." Dante chuckled, but something in his expression remained calculating. "Maybe." Then, just like that, he walked away, leaving Isabella gripping the fabric of her dress with trembling hands. She had underestimated Dante Morelli, and that was a mistake she couldn't afford to make. Later that afternoon, Victor called her into his office. She entered hesitantly, the vast space filled with books, fine leather furniture, and the distinct scent of coffee. Victor sat behind a massive desk, his fingers tracing the rim of a whiskey glass. "You and Dante spoke this morning," he said, his tone unreadable. Isabella's pulse quickened. Briefly. Victor's lips curled slightly. "I hope he wasn't too charming. He has a habit of making people nervous." "Too late for that. Your friend is observant," Isabella admitted. Victor chuckled. "That's a nice way of saying he's a pain in the ass." Her lips twitched despite herself. Victor took a slow sip of whiskey. "I trust Dante with my life. If he ever makes you uncomfortable, you tell me." His words surprised her. There was genuine protectiveness beneath them, but he had no idea he was protecting the wrong woman. The Montenegro charity gala was fast approaching, and the pressure to maintain appearances grew stronger. Lucia had arranged for Isabella to meet with an elite stylist, ensuring she wouldn't embarrass the family. Every move she made was being watched, judged, tested. But the worst part, Victor had started to trust her. Over the next few days, he invited her to spend time with him, not as a trophy wife, but as someone he wanted to understand. She found herself drawn to him despite her fear. The way he listened, the way he spoke, the quiet strength he carried. One evening, as they sat outside on the mansion's private terrace, Victor turned toward her. "Tell me something true." Isabella hesitated. She had been living in lies since the moment she walked down that aisle. But here, under the moonlight, she wanted, for just a moment, to be real. She inhaled deeply. "I love designing dresses." Victor tilted his head. "Not exactly a shocking confession. It is when you realize I never got to wear one." Silence stretched between them. Then Victor said, almost thoughtfully, "That is a shame." Something in his voice made her chest tighten. She had expected hostility, suspicion, coldness. Instead, she had found kindness, curiosity, something dangerously close to warmth. But warmth was dangerous, because the more she let herself care, the harder it would be when the truth finally came out. The Montenegro charity gala was only a few days away, and the pressure was suffocating. Every morning, Isabella felt the weight of eyes on her, watching, evaluating, waiting for her to make a mistake. She spent the day with Lucia's selected personal stylist, getting fitted into custom-made gowns and diamonds worth more than she had ever seen in her life. But none of it mattered. She needed to find out what happened to Camilla before her secret unraveled. That night, when the mansion was quieter, Isabella did what she hadn't dared to do before. She searched for clues. She carefully walked through the corridors, her heartbeat pounding with each step. The Montenegro estate was massive, with locked doors and endless halls. But Camilla had lived here for months before the wedding. Surely she had left something behind. She found her way to Camilla's old bedroom, the one that had been emptied out after the wedding. Inside, the air was thick with perfume and forgotten memories. The vanity still held a single lipstick print on the mirror, a shade Isabella would never wear. As she rummaged through the drawers, her hands trembled. She wasn't a thief. She was just desperate. Then, her fingers brushed against something hidden beneath a pile of discarded scarves. A letter. Her breath caught as she unfolded it, the ink slightly smudged. It was addressed to someone named Lucas. "I can't go through with it. I love you. Meet me at the docks after midnight." The letter was dated the night before the wedding. A chill ran down Isabella's spine. Camila hadn't just disappeared. She had run away. Isabella sat in the darkness of the bedroom, clutching the letter. Her mind raced. If Camila had planned to leave, why hadn't anyone found her? Why had the wedding gone through without a public scandal? Her hands trembled as she tucked the letter into her dress. She had to be careful. The Montenegro name was powerful. If Victor or Lucia knew about this letter, what would they do? She didn't have time to think, because when she stepped into the hallway, someone was already waiting for her. Victor. His tall figure leaned casually against the wall, his face unreadable. "What are you doing in Camila's room?" His voice was quiet, but there was an edge to it. Isabella's pulse skyrocketed. "I just wanted to feel closer to the woman I was supposed to be." It wasn't entirely a lie. Victor's blind eyes studied her, as if seeing more than anyone with sight ever could. "You're lying." Her breath hitched. "Camila never loved me," he continued, his tone calm but distant. "I knew at the moment I put a ring on her finger. She was never mine." A lump formed in Isabella's throat. He knew. Maybe not the full truth, but enough. "And yet," he murmured, stepping closer, "you're nothing like her." Isabella's heart pounded dangerously fast. Victor reached out, his fingers grazing the edge of her jawline. A test. "Who are you really?" She swallowed hard. "Your wife. For now." And that was the most dangerous part of all. The discovery of Camila's letter haunted Isabella through the night. She had proof that Camila never intended to marry Victor. But what did that mean for her? If Victor discovered the truth, what would he do? Morning arrived with unforgiving tension. As Isabella dressed for breakfast, she prepared herself for another battle with Lucia Montenegro, whose cold stares had only grown more piercing. But today felt different. When she entered the lavish dining room, she noticed a strange silence. Victor was already seated, his fingers idly tracing the rim of his coffee cup. Lucia, however, was standing, a folded newspaper clenched in her manicured hand. "Would you care to explain this?" Lucia's voice was smooth, but laced with danger, as she tossed the newspaper onto the table. Isabella's stomach clenched. Her face was on the front page. Mysterious transformation of the Montenegro bride. Is she hiding something? A sickening wave of fear rolled over Isabella as she skimmed the article. It highlighted discrepancies in her mannerisms, her background, and how Camila Ferraz had seemingly changed overnight. Victor's expression remained unreadable as he folded the paper and placed it aside. "It was bound to happen," he said, his voice neutral. Isabella's breath caught. Was he defending her, or was he simply not surprised? Lucia, however, was seething. "I will not have this family turned into a spectacle. Whatever secrets you are keeping, I will uncover them." Isabella knew then Lucia would stop at nothing to expose her. And if she did, there would be no escape. After breakfast, Isabella hurried back to the sanctuary of her bedroom, gripping the edges of Camila's letter. The weight of the secret was crushing her. She needed to know more. She needed to know who Lucas was. With a racing heart, she picked up the landline phone and dialed the only private investigator she trusted, an old friend from her past, Mateo Vasquez. When he answered, she whispered, "I need you to find someone for me." She gave him Lucas's name and the date of the letter, knowing it wasn't much to go on, but Mateo had always been good at finding ghosts. Hanging up, she turned, only to collide directly into Victor's chest. Her heart nearly stopped. "Who were you calling?" His voice was calm, but his presence filled the room with quiet intensity. Isabella stepped back, trying to collect herself. "Just an old friend." Victor's fingers twitched at his side. "You keep too many secrets, wife." The way he said it sent a shiver through her. For a moment, he stood still, as if he were trying to listen to the truth, buried in her silence. Then, to her horror, Victor reached out, not for her, but for the letter in her hands. She barely had time to react before he plucked it from her grasp. Panic shot through her. "What is this?" he murmured, fingers tracing the delicate paper. Every muscle in Isabella's body screamed at her to lie, to hide, to escape. But it was too late. Victor unfolded the letter, his blind eyes scanning nothing, but his fingers pressing into the page as if trying to read the truth through touch alone. And then, his face changed. Cold realization settled over him like a shadow. His voice dropped to something unreadable. He lifted his chin, his gaze distant but piercing. "You've been searching for Camila." Isabella's world collapsed in an instant. He knew. And now, there was no way out. Victor stood still, his fingers still gripping the letter, his blind eyes fixed on Isabella. "You've been searching for Camila," he repeated, his voice quieter this time. A slow, heavy silence filled the room. Isabella's mind raced, searching for a way to undo what had just happened. "Victor, don't lie to me," he cut her off, his voice sharp but not angry. "Not yet." She swallowed hard. He deserved the truth. "I found that letter in Camila's old bedroom," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "She wrote it the night before the wedding, to a man named Lucas." Victor's expression didn't change, but something about him shifted. A tension, an understanding. "You knew, didn't you?" Isabella asked, unable to stop herself. Victor was silent for a long moment before he exhaled. "I suspected." The confession stunned her. Victor continued, "Camila never loved me. That much was obvious. But I thought she would at least go through with the marriage. When she didn't, I wasn't surprised." Isabella took a shaky breath. "Why did you go through with it?" A bitter smile flickered across his lips. "Because my mother had already arranged everything. The wedding wasn't about love. It was about power, business, reputation. When Camila disappeared, it was easier for them to cover it up than admit I'd been abandoned." His words sent a chill down Isabella's spine. Lucia had known. She had orchestrated everything to protect the Montenegro name. "You were never supposed to be here, were you?" Victor murmured, his voice almost amused. "You were a mistake." The words stung. Yes, she was a mistake. And now, she was a mistake he could not ignore. The tension between them stretched dangerously thin in the following days. Victor didn't confront her again, but something had shifted. He was more careful around her now. He asked fewer questions, but his silence was louder than any accusation. And the worst part, Isabella could feel something else between them, something that had no business existing. A connection. One evening, as they sat in the library, Victor reading in Braille, Isabella staring blankly at a book she wasn't actually reading, he broke the silence. "You should leave," he said suddenly. The words punched the air out of her lungs. Her fingers curled around the edges of the book. "What?" Victor exhaled slowly. "You don't belong here. We both know that." She stared at him. "Then why haven't you told Lucia? Why haven't you had me thrown out?" His lips twitched, just slightly. "Because, despite everything, you're the only person in this house who doesn't lie to me." Isabella let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. But then Victor leaned forward, his hands resting on the armrests of his chair, his blind gaze locking onto her like he could see straight through her. "You're still lying about something, Isabella." Hearing her real name on his lips sent a shiver through her. She felt like she was standing at the edge of a cliff. She could run, she could tell the truth, or she could fall straight into whatever this was between them. "I'll leave," she whispered, but neither of them moved, because for all the lies between them, neither of them actually wanted that. And that was the most dangerous truth of all. The air in the Montenegro mansion felt heavier after that night. Victor hadn't spoken about their conversation again, but something had shifted. He knew who she was now, not just the woman mistakenly placed at the altar, but a liar, a woman tangled in secrets. And yet, he hadn't thrown her out. Isabella should have left. She had promised she would, but she couldn't. Not when she still didn't know what had happened to Camila. Not when her heart was caught somewhere between guilt and something far more dangerous. A growing, undeniable pull toward the man she had no right to love. Then, just when she thought things couldn't get worse, Camila returned. It happened without warning. One moment, Isabella was in the study, pretending to read while Victor worked at his desk, and the next, Lucia's voice echoed down the hallway. Camila. The name sent a shockwave through Isabella's body. She barely had time to react before the doors to the study burst open. There she was, Camila Ferraz, standing in the doorway, alive, unharmed, but entirely unrepentant. She looked different than Isabella expected. Not a broken, lost woman returning after a horrible mistake. No, she was smiling, as if she had won a game no one else knew they were playing. Victor stood slowly. "Camila," he said, his voice impossibly calm. "Hello, darling," Camila purred. And just like that, Isabella's world began to crumble. The room was silent, the weight of Camila's return suffocating. Isabella couldn't breathe. Camila stepped forward, her gaze flicking to her with obvious amusement. "You must be the woman who took my place," she mused. "How interesting." Victor's jaw tightened. "Where the hell have you been?" Camila sighed dramatically, as if her disappearance hadn't just turned an entire life upside down. "I needed time," she said smoothly, "but I realized something important." Victor's expression didn't change. "And what's that?" Camila smiled. "I made a mistake, and now I've come home." Isabella felt the floor beneath her vanish. This wasn't an apology. This wasn't regret. This was a calculated move. She had run away from a life she never wanted, and now she was back, not because she loved Victor, but because she wanted something. And Isabella, she was nothing more than an inconvenience. Victor didn't respond right away. His grip on his cane tightened, his expression impossible to read. But then, after what felt like an eternity, he simply said, "You shouldn't have come back." For the first time since stepping into the room, Camila faltered. Lucia, who had been watching in tight-lipped silence, finally spoke. "This is your wife, Victor," she reminded him coldly. "You have an obligation to this family." The words felt like a dagger, because technically, she was right. Camila was his wife, not Isabella. Victor turned his head slightly, facing Isabella. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. And then, he did the unthinkable. He reached for Isabella's hand, held it, firm, unshaken, and he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "She is my wife." The room erupted. Lucia gasped. Camila's smile disappeared. And Isabella, she felt herself falling, because Victor had just chosen her. But how long would that choice last? The Montenegro mansion had never felt so suffocating. Camila's presence lingered like a storm cloud, thick with unspoken threats. Isabella couldn't escape her gaze, the smug smirk that never quite faded. But the real danger, Victor. Since the moment he had publicly chosen Isabella, everything had changed. Lucia seethed in silence, retreating to her private quarters to scheme. Camila, wounded but not defeated, played her role perfectly. The wronged wife, the woman who had come back for love. And Victor, he had become more guarded, more unreadable than ever. Isabella watched him carefully over the following days. He was waiting for something, not Camila's tricks, not Lucia's manipulation. He was waiting for her to break, to confess, to prove she wasn't who she claimed to be. And he wasn't wrong. The weight of her lies pressed down harder than ever. She had taken someone else's place. She had let herself believe, for just a moment, that this could be real. And now, with Camila back, reality was shattering all around her. One evening, as Isabella walked toward the library, lost in thought, she found herself face to face with Dante Morelli, the man who had suspected her from the beginning. "Rough week," Dante mused, sipping a glass of whiskey. Isabella clenched her fists. "Not in the mood, Dante." He smirked, unfazed. "Oh, I think you should be." His gaze flickered over her, sharper than ever. "Tell me something, sweetheart. Did you really think this would last?" She forced herself to hold his stare. "I don't know what you mean." Dante chuckled. "You're not Camila. And now that she's back, it's only a matter of time before Victor realizes what you are." Isabella felt her blood turn cold. Dante took another sip of whiskey, watching her carefully. "And when he does, you won't just lose him. You'll lose everything." Her breath shook. Because he was right. She wasn't supposed to be here. And soon, she wouldn't be. The night was thick with tension. The Montenegro mansion felt like a battlefield, the silence between its walls louder than any argument. Victor had been avoiding her all evening. Watching. Study. Wait. And Isabella. She was running out of time. She needed answers. She needed to find Lucas, to uncover the final truth about Camila's escape. She had one chance. That night, when the household had settled into a restless sleep, Isabella slipped out of her room, moving quickly toward the Montenegro estate's office. If there were records, security footage, asterisk, anything that could confirm Camila's last movements, asterisk, this was where she would find them. But as she reached the heavy office door, a voice cut through the darkness. "You never learn, do you?" Isabella froze. She turned slowly, her breath catching in her throat. Camila stood in the dim hallway, watching her with a knowing smirk. The other woman stepped closer, her voice soft, mocking. "I wonder how long it would take you to get desperate." Isabella's fingers curled into fists. "Why did you come back?" Camila laughed. "Because I got bored. Because I missed the power. Because I wanted to see how far you'd fall before the truth destroyed you." She stepped even closer, her voice a deadly whisper. "And because I always win." A shiver ran down Isabella's spine. Camila wasn't here for love. She was here for war. And Isabella was her first target. She didn't get the chance to respond. Because just then, a second voice filled the hallway. "Well," Victor's voice came from the shadows, low and unreadable. "Isn't this interesting?" Isabella's stomach dropped. Camila, however, simply smiled. She turned to him, eyes glittering. "Darling, I was just telling your wife that I think we need to have a long, overdue conversation." Victor said nothing, but his expression, his carefully controlled, unreadable mask, was beginning to crack. And Isabella knew. The war had just begun. The tension in the Montenegro mansion was unbearable. Since the night in the hallway, Isabella had felt it in every glance, every unsaid word. Victor was watching her, not in the way he used to, not with curiosity, not with intrigue. Now it was cold calculation. He was waiting for her to slip, waiting for her to prove what he already suspected, that she didn't belong here. Camila's return had only made things worse. She played her role beautifully, the doting wife, the woman who had made a mistake and was here to make amends. Lucia, of course, welcomed her back like a prodigal daughter. And Isabella, she was being erased. Every day, Camila reclaimed more of what should have been hers: the attention, the power, the seat beside Victor at business dinners. It was only a matter of time before she reclaimed him, too. And yet, Victor still hadn't made a decision. He hadn't sent Isabella away. Not yet. And that terrified her more than anything. One evening, as Isabella stood on the balcony, watching the city lights, she heard his footsteps approach. She didn't turn around. "I can hear you thinking," Victor murmured, stopping beside her. Her fingers tightened on the railing. "And what do you hear?" A pause. Then, "A woman who knows her time is running out." A sharp ache bloomed in her chest. It was true. She swallowed hard. "If you know the truth, why haven't you sent me away?" Victor exhaled slowly. "Because I'm still trying to understand why I don't want to." His words shattered her. She turned, finally facing him. His blind eyes held something she couldn't name: anger, longing, something that felt too much like hesitation. Like he didn't want to let her go. "Tell me why you stayed," he said, voice low. "Tell me the truth." Isabella opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Because the truth, She had no answer that wouldn't destroy them both. The next evening, everything fell apart. It happened at a charity gala, an event hosted by the Montenegro family to maintain their public image. Everyone was there. The elite, the press, the vultures waiting for a scandal. Camila played the role of perfect wife, draping herself beside Victor, whispering things in his ear, smiling for the cameras. Isabella felt like a shadow, ignored, discarded, erased. But she had one last move to make. She hadn't given up on finding Lucas, the man Camila had written to, the one person who might hold the final piece of this puzzle. And then, just before the speeches began, she saw him. Lucas. He was across the ballroom, speaking to Dante Morelli. A shockwave of realization went through Isabella. Dante had known all along. He had been playing both sides. She didn't have time to think. She moved fast, weaving through the crowd, reaching Lucas just as Dante turned away. "You need to tell me the truth," she whispered, grabbing Lucas's wrist. He frowned. "Who the hell are you?" Her breath shook. "I'm the woman living the life Camila ran from." Lucas froze. And that's when the worst possible thing happened. Victor appeared beside her. His expression was unreadable, but his presence felt like a storm. "Who is he?" he asked quietly. Isabella's heart stopped. She looked at Lucas, at Victor, at the entire room watching them. And then, Camila's voice rang out. "Oh, darling, I see you've met my old lover." Silence. Isabella felt the world tip beneath her feet. Victor's jaw tightened. His hands curled into fists. Camila stepped forward, enjoying every second of Isabella's horror. "You didn't really think she ended up here by accident, did you?" she purred. "She was always searching for me, Victor. She was never here for you." A deadly silence fell. And then, finally, Victor turned to Isabella. His voice was like ice, sharp enough to cut through her. "Tell me that's not true." But she couldn't, because it was. And just like that, the life she had stolen crumbled around her. The room spun. Dozens of elite guests stood frozen, their eyes darting between Victor, Isabella, and Camila, waiting for a scandal to unfold. Isabella couldn't move. Victor's words still echoed in her head. "Tell me that's not true." But it was. She had lied. She had stolen someone else's life. And now, she was about to lose everything. Camila smirked, loving every second of Isabella's humiliation. "Oh, come now," she purred. "You didn't think this little game would last forever, did you?" Isabella's hands shook at her sides. She wanted to deny it, to fight. But Victor looked at her like she had ripped something out of him. The betrayal wasn't just in his expression. It was in the silence, the way his breath came slower, the way his fingers curled like he was holding himself together. Camila stepped forward, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "It's time to end this charade, darling. Annul the marriage and come home." Victor's jaw clenched. And then, finally, he spoke. "You were never my home, Camila." The words hit like a gunshot. Camila stiffened, her confident smirk flickering. Victor turned to Isabella, his voice softer now, but still edged with quiet devastation. "Why did you stay?" The question gutted her. She could have said 100 things, could have begged for forgiveness, could have told him the truth. But only one answer mattered. "Because I fell in love with you," she whispered. Gasps rippled through the room. Victor stood frozen. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away. And Isabella's heart shattered. The next few days were a blur of heartbreak and silence. Victor locked himself away, refusing to see anyone. Lucia was triumphant, Camila smug, and Isabella? She was preparing to leave. The marriage would be annulled. The scandal would fade, and she would disappear like she had never existed. But on the morning of her departure, something stopped her. Victor. He was waiting at the entrance of a Montenegro estate, dressed in his usual dark suit, his blind eyes focused in her direction as if he could actually see her. "Stay." The word knocked the breath from her lungs. Her heart raced. "Victor, I don't care about Camila," he said. His voice was low, raw, filled with something too dangerous to name. "I don't care about the lie. I don't even care about the damn wedding. His hand tightened around his cane. "I care that you love me." Isabella's breath shook. Tears burned in her eyes. "I do." Victor exhaled sharply, as if he had been holding his breath all this time. And then, for the first time since she met him, he reached for her. His fingers traced the side of her face, memorizing every inch. "You aren't a mistake," he murmured. Isabella's chest ached. Victor wasn't the kind of man who begged. He didn't ask for things he didn't want. And he was asking her to stay. So she did. Because this time, it was her choice. Did this story keep you on the edge of your seat? Which moment impacted you the most? Was it the shocking wedding swap, the intense chemistry between Isabella and Victor, or the moment he made his final choice? Speech Balloon, we want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell us which part of the story made you feel the most emotions. Open Book got an idea for a new story? Let us know what kind of drama, romance, or mystery you'd love to see next on the channel. Your suggestion might just become our next big story. Thumbs up, hit the like button if you enjoyed the twists and turns of this tale. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss our next exciting story. Rocket Sparkles.